مساء الخير. السلام عليكم. I would like to thank you for coming. This is the fourth day in this doctoral training, and as a department we would like to participate in this training. Colleagues from the department have volunteered to talk about research in different ways. We will start with Professor Hassan Blhiyah, and he's going to talk about the nature of scientific inquiry in social sciences, so setting the stage. Afterwards, Professor Jamal Bahmad is going to talk about how to write a publishable article for a peer-reviewed journal. And then I will conclude with how to promote your research nationally and internationally, of course. So I would like to give the floor to Professor Hassan Blhiyah to start his lecture. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Because I'm happy to be here today to give a broad presentation about scientific inquiry in social science. Okay, so I would like to start with a quote by Socrates, the Greek philosopher, who says that the unexamined life is not worth living. Okay, as you know, Socrates is a Greek philosopher, and he was probably, most known for the love of wisdom, okay? And so it is with research in general, or research in social sciences. We're expected to examine our beliefs, our thoughts, our views, our perceptions in society. Okay, so before I delve into more detail and talk about how we conduct research in social science, I want to start by talking about methods of knowing. Okay, how do we come to know what we know? Okay, so one method of knowing is what we call experience. Okay, for example, as a child, you go to the beach, you're thirsty, you take a sip from seawater, it's salty, therefore you reach the conclusion that actually seawater is not drinkable. You email a professor, he doesn't respond. You email another professor, they don't respond. Okay, so from your experience, if you want to see your advisor, don't email them. Okay, come to بالرباط and try to find them. Okay, another method of knowing is authority, which means a trusted source. Okay, for example, you face a difficult situation in life, okay, or a challenge, you can ask your mom or your dad, okay, and then they will tell you what to do, okay, and that becomes part of knowledge, okay. I think a lot of you also rely on your teachers, because your teachers are usually considered role models, okay, so they're to help you, and many times you know what you know, okay, based on the knowledge that you gather or that you learn from your teacher. Okay, so besides experience and authority, the third method of knowing is reasoning. And we can talk about two types of reasoning. Inductive reasoning, which means developing generalizations based on observation of a limited number of related events or experiences. Okay, so for example, you have met some students from, let's take just university like Ibn Zawra University, and you studied with them during the master's program. You think or you assess their performance as being good. Okay, therefore you come up with the conclusion that actually all students from Ibn Zawra University are good students. Okay, so basically we observe a limited number of events or cases, and based on that, okay, we come up with a generalization or a conclusion. Okay, the opposite of inductive reasoning is deductive reasoning, okay? Arriving at specific conclusions based on general principles, observations, or experiences, okay? So if we try to take this same example, we try to revert it. For example, you can see all students from Ibn Zuhra University are good students, okay? So this time, instead of saying a few, but all, okay? Mustafa is from Ibn Zuhra University, therefore, he must be a good student. Okay, so far, I've talked about 3 methods of knowing, okay? We talked about experience, okay, learning, and reasoning. Okay, now here we have a problem, okay? Experience, authority, inductive and deductive reasoning, they are all limited and subject to error. Okay, for example, we know that we can't always rely on our experience because it's very subjective, okay? What you know now will be different from what you know next year, okay? So you base your decision on your experience now, but next year you're gonna learn more, so your decision will be different, okay? 10 years after now, you will have gathered more experience, okay? So really, our decisions, if we're on experience only, okay, remains very subjective, okay? If we take, for example, inductive and deductive reasoning, it's the same thing, okay? For example, 2 of your professors do not respond to your emails, okay? We cannot say that all professors don't respond to emails, okay? Because you have not really sampled all the professors, okay? So therefore, in science, we don't rely on experience, we don't rely on authority, we don't always rely on inductive and deductive reasoning. I mean, they could be used maybe to illustrate a point, but not to prove a point, okay? So therefore, what we need is the scientific method, okay? So as researchers, we rely on the scientific method. We don't rely on experience, nor on authority, nor on inductive or deductive reasoning. Okay, let me now move on to the second point, which is what we mean by the scientific method, okay? So all of you, when you conduct your research, you're expected to follow a scientific method in social science. Okay, so you start by recognizing or identifying a problem, okay? So when you do a doctoral dissertation, it's about a problem, it's not about a fact. If something is a fact, there is no reason to research it, okay? You research something that's problematic, okay? Something that's a problem, okay? So you recognize and identify a problem. You can start either with your research questions, or you can start with some hypothesis, okay? So a hypothesis is an explanation for the occurrence of a certain behavior or phenomenon, okay? It's an explanation, okay, but you have to find out whether that hypothesis is true or if it's false. To figure out whether the hypothesis is true or false, or in order to answer your research questions, okay, you need, the next phase is to collect some data or data, okay? After you collect your data, you have to run an analysis, and after that, you can state your conclusions or findings, okay? So if you have started with some hypotheses, okay, your analysis will either confirm or disconfirm the hypothesis, okay? Or if you have research questions, okay, you have to answer these research questions. Okay, so the next point, let's talk now about the scientific method in social science. Okay, so we can define research in general terms in the following manner. Okay, we can see that research is the formal, systematic application of the scientific method to the study of problems. Okay, so some of the key terms here are formal. Yeah, this is not something random. Okay, it's not about experience. Okay, it's something formal. It is systematic, so that means you have to follow certain procedures. Okay, you have to use the scientific method as I had just explained. Okay, and then you have to study a problem, a social problem. If it's not a problem, okay, that's not research. Okay, you're just repeating what other people have already proven. Okay, you have to solve a problem, you have to analyze a problem. Okay, so therefore, we can see that social science research can be defined as follows. Okay, social scientific research or science research is the formal, systematic application of the scientific method to the study of social problems. Yeah, we are interested in what happens in society, issues like education, migration, wealth distribution, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this leads me to the next point, okay, point number 4. Okay, I'm gonna talk now in a little bit of detail about approaches to research in social science. Social science research is often broadly categorized as qualitative or quantitative. Neither one is better than the other. Okay, so therefore we can see that both quantitative and qualitative researchers collect and analyze data. Yes, so again, if you want to analyze a problem, if you want to test a hypothesis, okay, you need some data to analyze. You cannot just rely on your hunches or on your experience. That's not really acceptable in science. Okay, both quantitative and qualitative researchers derive conclusions and interpretations. Okay, so you have this body of knowledge, you have your data, you analyze it, okay, and then you come up with conclusions and interpretations. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and compare and contrast quantitative and qualitative research. Okay. Okay, so in quantitative or in the quantitative approach, we care about numerical data. Okay, we care about numbers, percentages, the average. Okay, for example, 30% of the informants say this, 70% say this. Okay, the majority think in this way. Okay, only a minority think in this way. Okay, so for example, you can use, if you use, for example, Excel, or maybe if you use some maybe advanced programs, you can use SPSS for that matter. In quantitative research, okay, the aim is to describe, predict, or control variables of interest. Okay, variables, متغيرات. So it could be things like gender, age, marital status, socioeconomic status, and so on. And you want to see whether actually there is a correlation between these variables and the subject that you are investigating. Okay, one view in people who conduct quantitative research is that the world is relatively uniform, stable, and predictable. Okay, that means if I study a certain phenomenon, okay, and if I use this scientific method, I can come up with specific conclusions because I believe what I'm doing will lead me to the truth. On the other hand, in qualitative research, researchers don't really pay much attention to numbers. Okay. What they care about is narrative and visual data. Okay, the aim is to gain insight into phenomenon of interest. In other words, we're not interested in these variables like age, gender, marital status, and so on, and the extent to which they interact with other variables. Okay, the view about knowledge is the following. Okay, knowledge is situated, is contextual. It's not stable, it's not uniform. Okay, and there are different perspectives. Okay, so there is not only one perspective when it comes to analyzing data or conducting research. I'm going to show you now a diagram that helps summarize some of the things that I've talked about so far. Okay, the positivist approaches are mostly categorized within the quantitative research. Okay, so we're interested in numbers, we're interested in measurement, we're interested in statistical analysis. We want to know the mean, the average, what the majority of the people think. We don't care about exceptions, okay? So therefore, if you use a survey, if you use an experiment, a questionnaire, yeah, all these are within the general approach known as a positivist approach. On the other hand, in naturalistic approaches, which are very often qualitative, okay, they include things like ethnography, which means the study of cultural patterns and perspectives of participants. You can do interviews. When you do an interview, you don't really care about numbers. Yeah, what you care about is the person's story, his or her narrative, okay, how they see the world in their own terms, not on your own terms as a researcher, okay? You can rely on observation. Yeah? You observe people's behavior, okay, what's happened. You can do a case study. You can just focus on one small group or one small category. And again, here, it's not really important to look at everything. You don't care about sampling. You can just do one case study, and that's acceptable as a method in the naturalistic approaches. Or you can do action research, which is often used, I think it's known as البحث الإجرائي, usually known in education. For example, you work at a school. There is, for example, certain problems, maybe with plagiarism or cheating behavior. So you can work with other teachers, you can work with principals, you can work with the headmaster, and together you try to come up with solutions to solve these problems in order to enhance students' performance. Okay, so still talking about quantitative versus qualitative research in social science. In quantitative research, okay, researchers state the hypothesis, specify research procedures, so there are specific steps or procedures to follow, and you control the context. Okay, you have to make sure the group that you are investigating is more or less homogeneous, okay, so that you know exactly which variables you want to control. Okay, researchers identify large samples, yeah, because really, let's say if you want to study a certain phenomenon in Morocco, you cannot just rely on, for example, on a sample collected in Rabat and say this is what Moroccans think, okay? Theoretically, you need, let's say, a representative sample. That means you need subjects probably from all cities in Morocco. And again, if you decide to go ahead with this approach, again, there are methods that you can follow to make sure your sample is large enough and it is representative of the entire population. Okay, researchers are interested in statistical significance. Okay, are my findings statistically significant? Do they make sense? Okay, do they represent what the majority of the people think? Okay, on the other hand, in qualitative research, okay, researchers form foreshadowed problems. They don't control, but explain context. Okay, so variables are not really important in qualitative research, therefore we don't control them. Okay, a large amount of data is collected over an extended time in a natural setting. Yes, so you do care here most about, let's say, data in its natural habitat. Okay, data are categorized and organized into patterns. Okay, so in other words, the categories that you will use to analyze, they will emerge from the data. You don't start with a preset, let's say, number of variables, okay, or categories. Okay, the categories will emerge from the data. Okay, here I have a quote that kind of challenges the notion of quantification, the fact that, for example, that we need a large number to reach our conclusions, again, to illustrate why this doesn't always work in social science. Okay, so this is a quote by Emmanuel Shaigloff. The title of the article is Reflections on Quantification in the Study of Conversation. Okay, so he says the following: one is also a number. The single case is also a quantity. And statistical significance is but one form of significance. And no number of other episodes that develop differently will undo the fact that in these cases, it went the way it did. So in other words, you can just like pick up one exception and say this exception, it violates the rule, we're gonna ignore it. Okay, the fact of the matter is it happened, we have to account for it. Okay, so in qualitative research, okay, even one case, okay, should be analyzed. Even one case count. It's not considered an outlier. Okay, so the last point, okay, point number five, okay, ethics of social science research. Okay, as researchers, we are all expected to be aware of and attend to ethical considerations. Okay, so there are certain things that are considered right and certain things that are considered wrong. We can't do them, okay? Okay, there are two main overarching ethical rules that guide researchers. Okay, the first one is that participants should not be harmed. You know, when you collect data, you expect people to tell you the truth. Okay, maybe the truth will harm them. Okay, so you have to make sure they will not be harmed in any way. Okay, this is your responsibility as a researcher. Okay, researchers should obtain participants' informed consent. Okay, so before you collect any data, you have to get the approval of your participants. Okay, many times some graduate students or doctoral students, they will come to me. I'm about to enter my class, and they say, can I collect the data with my class? Okay, so that's not how it works. Okay, you need to prepare a consent form. You need to take the permission of the students. Okay, maybe your students will start fill out the questionnaire, and they don't feel comfortable. Yes, so they should be given the right to stop or withdraw participation. It's their right. You cannot force them to participate. Okay, you should be willing participants. So always try to get their informed consent. Okay, so I started with a quote by Socrates. Okay, I want now to end with some words of wisdom, okay, by Gandhi. Okay, so Gandhi warned us about 7 dangers to human virtue. Okay, number 1, wealth without work. Okay, number 2, pleasure without conscience. Okay, number 3, knowledge without character. Number 4, business without ethics. Number 5, science without humanity. Number 6, religion without sacrifice. And number 7, politics without principle. Okay, so our role as researchers in social science is really to dismantle the status quo, okay, to raise questions in order to improve our lives as human beings so that everybody lives in dignity and respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hassan, for setting up the stage for researchers. I believe we all have to go through a stage where we get to know the steps of doing the right thing when it comes to research. And I believe one of the handicaps in the Moroccan university is the difficulty of that students tend to face when it comes to starting their research. There is less awareness of research methods, and we still need to accommodate a number of strategies that are employed and deployed in research. And I think the presentation of Professor Hassan Blhiyah has tackled these points clearly. The next presentation is going to be by my dear colleague, Professor Jamal Ahmed. Possibly you have already seen him before reading a paper by Professor Kinbib. Today is going to talk about how to write a publishable article for a peer-reviewed journal. And I think this is a very important subject for young researchers and forthcoming researchers, inshallah. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Professor Hassan Bellhiah, for setting stage for social science research, but also social science writing. Okay, they go together, and actually, writing is the most important activity that you have, to do, to perform when you are a doctoral student. But of course, in the good old days, students didn't have to publish, okay, before going for the viva and obtaining their degree and going on to become, teachers and so on. But now, in most countries, including Morocco, it's a requirement that you publish a couple of articles, at least, in a peer-reviewed journal or in an edited book. In a lot of universities around the world, even like book chapters don't count anymore. They want you to publish an article or more than one article in a peer-reviewed journal. And of course, this is not an easy process, and anybody who has gone through this process knows all difficulties that are involved. But of course, after the first or second article, you just know exactly what the requirements are, okay, what the standards of peer-reviewed journals are, and in general, they are the same, okay? Be it, journals in social sciences or actually in other fields, like natural sciences, they have the same requirements. Of course, one of them is quality, okay? So they want, the article to be of very good quality in both form and content. So it needs to be well written, but also the ideas, that are exposed in there need to be, original, they need to contribute something to the field, and so on and so forth. So, this is very important, a ritual, okay, that, or rite of passage, actually, that students, have go through. It's very difficult, it can be stressful, but often it's also very thrilling, and one of the happiest moments of your life as a doctoral student is when you see your first article published in a peer-reviewed, journal, because that's usually a sign that you exist as a researcher, okay, that you are born as a researcher, and your life after that is never, the same. As it was, it had been before. So I'm going to talk about that, today. I'm going to talk about what is involved in publishing articles as social scientists, okay, especially as young social scientists, people who are just about to begin, okay, or are considering publishing their first article in a peer-reviewed, journal. Of course, when I talk about peer-reviewed journals, they are also called academic journals, okay? So I'll talk, in my next slide about why they exist, okay? And how many are out there, okay? And other, very important information to know about them. Then again, the focus of my presentation, as Mr. Chairman said, is really about the writing process, okay? What is involved, okay, from the research stage, like when you, and of course the research stage for an article starts with selecting or identifying a topic that you want, your article, to be about. And of course, when you are writing a dissertation, okay, you have so much out there, like in terms of, in terms of material that can be or cannot be published, okay? So, for example, choosing to publish a chunk or part of a chapter, okay, as an article, rather than another part of another chapter or the same chapter is a decision that you have to make. So how do you know that topic that you have chosen, okay, to write about is a good topic, okay? So there are many criteria or characteristics that you need to take into consideration. And of course, also, these characteristics, are very important because, that's what the journal editors are looking for, okay? And again, they can be different from one publication to another, depending on the ranking of the journal, but also just its specialization, okay? So a journal, for example, that specializes in media studies is not one that is likely to publish your article about Moroccan literature, okay? So you need, of course, to target, to send your article to the right, to the right place or to the right journal. Then, of course, doing the writing, okay? So this is a very, very important, process, of course. So writing up, doing the research and then writing up the article. So how do you write it? How do you, is there a structure? Is it same like for all journals? Is it different from journal to journal, from field to field? We'll see that, today. And then every journal article I'd like to, has the same structure across social sciences, with some exceptions in the humanities fields, which are, part of the, of what, like, for example, what the English department is about. So we have social science in terms of linguistics, but we do also have fields that are typically humanities fields, such as cultural studies and literature. There are some differences. They can appear small, but they're actually very subtle, okay, in terms of differences, in terms of structure of a journal article. Then, of course, you know, how do you write the article? Where do you start? Should you always start from title, then the abstract, then the keywords, then the introduction? Or can you actually start in the middle, okay? Like start with, literature review, or, you know, the discussion or the findings or whatever, okay? So again, I think there are no set rules out there. You just start with what you find easiest, but also depending on the availability of the material that you have. So you have already done the research and you have findings and everything. It might be useful to start by talking about findings first, and then writing the introduction and the conclusion and the abstract and everything else, later. So how do you write a good title for an article? Sometimes there are good, as professors, we do a lot of peer reviewing for journals. And we have seen time and again that some excellent articles out there sometimes don't get a good press, or don't make a good impression on the peer reviewer, simply because title is not well chosen, okay? So the wording of the title, like choosing the right words and the right structure for title, is very important. How do you list the authors? Like sometimes you have more than one author for the article. And it's very customary and actually encouraged that PhD students publish their first article, or even their first and second articles, with their supervisors for many reasons. Of course, because supervisor is part of dissertation, but also because it is very likely that your article will get published, okay, sooner and in a more prestigious journal if you are co-author with your own, thesis, advisor or a research supervisor. So the abstract, how do you write it? How long should it be? What makes for a good abstract? Then keywords, introduction, literature review, methods, results, discussion, references, and acknowledgements. So I'll talk about each one of these elements in detail, later. Then again, we are talking here about research writing, and there are some guidelines that every article, okay, should follow, and I will expose and discuss them later on. Professor Bلحياح talked about research ethics. I'm going to talk about writing ethics, okay, towards the end of my presentation. And then finally, I'll talk about, what you need to do when you get to that stage where you need to revise, your article. So it is already written, it is there on your laptop, and now you need to revise it. Do you do it alone? Do you seek the help of others? What are the criteria that you need, to follow? And then finally, reviewing the article before you send it, to the journal is a very important step as well. So, peer-reviewed journals or academic journals, they are scholarly journals. So they are not general interest journals. They are, journals that publish scholarship or knowledge as it is produced by, active researchers, in the field. And they are the most common method of scholarly communication, okay? So, researchers, exist on almost every country, and we are communicating, okay? We are communicating, through these journals, because we are supposed to be producing knowledge, and when you produce this knowledge, we share it, on the pages of these journals. So someone, for example, based in Japan, and someone based in, say, in Morocco, they are communicating, through these journals by publishing their latest, insights, their latest research findings. So, in terms of numbers of journals out there, in 2017 alone, there were 35,000, okay? And their numbers keep going up, every week, every month, every year. So there are so many out there. But again, they are ranked according to quality, according to impact. The impact factor is very important. When you consider, publishing your first article, so you need to look for a journal that has, the highest possible impact factor out there, okay? That is, again, something very important to consider. And in terms of number of articles that are published every year, again, in 2017 alone, there were 2.5 million articles published. And of course, most of these don't get read by a lot of people. Like the most, I think, the average number of readers for each article is about 10 readers, okay? So that means that when you write this article, and then you publish it out there. Don't expect to be famous next day. I mean, it's very likely that you will never become famous, but the idea is that you publish, I mean, an article out there, and people who are interested, they will find it and read it. But there are parts of the article that get more read than others, so the abstract and title. So that's why you need to pay special attention and devote enough time to give in your article the best title possible, but also write the best abstract possible for it. Because as researchers, I mean, you are busy, so when you want to, I mean, to do a write about something, you just go to Google Scholar, for example, and to the library, and you find the most relevant articles, and usually you dig up or you come across like dozens of articles. Okay, and usually you can't read all of them because they are not all relevant. So how do you decide which article to read and which one not to read? Well, it's the abstract, okay? That you read the abstracts of many articles, and then afterwards you decide which ones will be relevant to your own paper, to your own research endeavor. Okay, so that's why abstracts are more read than any other part of the article or the whole article. And of course, this is a field like it's a big business out there. Okay, so I mean they are growing. I mean the growth rate for academic journals is 3% all year round, and this of course raises the question of what is happening to the academic book. Okay, in the old days, most researchers would make themselves, known to others by publishing books in their fields. Now the books are, the academic book is becoming less and less influential, but also less in demand, okay? Universities, when they employ researchers nowadays, they want them to publish articles, okay, in peer-reviewed journals with the highest ranking, possible, but also they want them to turn out, okay, to publish a lot of articles rather than publish a book every 5 years or so, okay? So that's why, books, they still exist, but again, it depends on the field. Like in literary studies, for example, in departments of literature, books are still quite prestigious, okay? You don't exist if you don't publish a book, okay, if you don't have a book under your name. But in social science departments, actually the trend nowadays is that, articles, and it has been a trend for, a couple of decades, last 2 decades at least, articles are seen as more prestigious, more impactful, okay, than publishing books, okay? But of course, this doesn't mean that the academic book is dead. It's still out there, and it's more prestigious, in some fields than in others, but also, even in social science, once you get established by publishing articles and so on, you want to have a book or two, okay, under your name. So a lot of researchers at a later stage in their career, they go for publishing books rather than, simply, bid on just publishing articles, for 20 or 30 years that they are active researchers. So yeah, so when you are trying to, to write your first article, or second article, always remember that you are writing to communicate and not to impress, okay? So make sure that, when you write, that your writing style, your ideas, that everything is very clear, okay? And comprehensible, to the reader. So, journal articles are not places where you are supposed to be using your best literary skills, okay? But they are places where you are supposed to show that you can communicate to other people in the field by using as simple and as clear, okay, language as possible. And of course, one thing that a lot of people complained that a lot of people, especially beginning researchers, have is that academic journals, especially journal editors, are very tough, okay? Are very tough, and also when they give you feedback, it's not constructive. Actually, it's as if they don't want you to publish with them at all, okay? That is not, truth. Actually, they exist to publish research, but they exist to publish the best research out there. And when I say the best research, also the best written research, okay? So writing is a very, very important, skill to master. So, and writing, for a peer-reviewed journals is almost a genre onto itself, okay? It has its own, rules that you need to follow. And of course, you need to select a journal where you want your article to appear, to be published. And of course, when you want to publish in a journal, you need to invest in time. You need to spend at least a day or an afternoon reading the best 5 or the best, 4 articles from that journal. And usually now when you go to websites like platforms such as that by Routledge, Taylor and Francis Group, you find that, journals, like on their first page, they have a list of their most popular, or most read articles. So you can go for those, and just read at least a couple. I advise you to read more, just to know, to have an idea about what kind of articles, what kind of article is published in this journal, what are they looking for, So usually get that kind of insight. So it's better than waiting until you have finished the article and then sending it to the journal and waiting is very important ritual as well. So you need to know how to wait, You need to be patient. And also you need to avoid the mistake of sending your article to 2 journals or more at the same time. Because there is nothing more frustrating to journals than when you submit an article to them and then later on when they come back to you, after 2 months, usually more, and say, we want to publish your article, the peer reviewers' feedback was good, and then you tell them, hey, I'm sorry, but I already published it in another journal, So they invested in, finding the right peer reviewers, getting you feedback and everything, and then you tell them, I published it elsewhere. What they do, the automatic reaction, of course, is that they blacklist you, They put you on the blacklist. That means you will never get published in that journal, And remember, although, there are, so many journals out there, like 35,000 and more, it's quite a small community when you are talking about your own field, Or actually subfield, for example, let's say film studies, Then African cinema, let's say, for example, there are just, 3 journals out there in the field. So you are very likely that, if you make a mistake, if you commit a sin with one of those journals, you will never get published with them again, or it will be, years and years before actually they forget and forgive you for the previous sin. Yeah, so again, make sure that you read also the journal's instructions for authors. So every journal has a document that just tells, the authors, the potential, writers of future articles, what the journal is expecting, from them. And then, and this is Professor Bijit is an expert on this, you need to consult, a style manual, Because most journals' house style is based on one of the most common, one of the most popular, style manuals out there. There are so many, so of course the APA, American Psychological Association's, style manual. Modern Language Association is more used, in some humanities fields. APA is more used in social science. Then Chicago Manual of Style. I don't know what this is happening, my screen keeps blinking. Yeah, so and then you need to be familiar with these, because, and of course, I'm not saying that, journals will follow them 100%, but usually they follow one of these styles up to 80% or so, So for example, in the humanities, the majority of journals followed Chicago, Manual of Style, and of course with some minor additions because each journal wants to have its own house style. So they will, for example, ask you to use footnotes rather than endnotes. Other journals will tell you, hey, we don't accept footnotes or endnotes, We want you to put all the important information in the, in text of the article. If it's not important enough to be there, then don't use it, So all we need is text of the article and then references. We don't do footnotes or endnotes. Yeah, so when you are trying to, to identify a good topic to write your article about, of course, you need help, you need advice, you need, people, sometimes you get the best ideas from your supervisor, your thesis advisor, because they have been in the field for many years, so they know what is likely to be published. Or sometimes they tell you that, I think if you write about this part of your dissertation, because they are your supervisor, so they know your dissertation very well. Sometimes they know it better than they know, their family members. So they tell you, hey, I think you'd better choose this part of this chapter and write about it and submit it to this or that journal, Because they have been, again, in the field for many years and they know. Sometimes just like other students, they can advise you on, you give them a chapter or more of your dissertation to read, and they tell you, I think, this would make for a very good, article, okay? So why don't you write it up, okay? Edit it and just send it, to a journal. And then research collaborators, so when you are a member of a research group, they can also give you all sorts of good ideas to publish your first article. And again, this means, brainstorming with a lot of people. Also literature reviews, like reading the latest research publications in your field, starting with journal articles, but also with books, will tell you exactly maybe, because, when you publish an article, you need to publish an article in order, for many reasons, of course. You don't just publish it and it will be accepted because you are so and so, or because you write well. A journal will accept an article usually based on whether it adds something to existing literature or not, okay? So there is a gap in scholarship about this or that aspect of Moroccan, let's say, literature or whatever, and then you are proposing, an article that would address, that would fill in the void, that would fill in the gap, in the field, okay? So that is the reason number one why journal articles are published, because you are adding something, okay? So there is a plus, okay? There is a value added, okay, or added value, to your research. So literature reviews are the best guide to get, to know whether you are adding something to the field or just repeating what has already been said. So again, when you choose, and this is the final slide about choosing a good topic, so it needs to be something that you are really interested in, because it really shows, okay? So you need to be the first one, who is interested in topic that you are writing an article about, because if you are interested in it, you will invest a lot of time and effort and energy, and especially you will wait, okay? Because when you send the article to a journal, okay, months just go by, okay, and they are very, very long, dark, cold months, okay? And you wait for feedback. And sometimes a lot of people think that the journal never received their article, or it's not interested, or so and so, okay? So it's just a long process, and you need to give it enough time. So that's why when you are a doctoral student, you need to start thinking about publishing your article starting from the end of the first year. Because if you wait until third or fourth year, then you will have a problem, okay? Your article will not be published, okay, soon enough for you to go through the defense, through the viva, okay? So you need to, to give this process enough time, okay? So finishing the article doesn't mean that it will get published tomorrow or next month. It usually takes up, I think the average now for good journals is 2 years. 1 year, 2 years. So it's just because good journals, they just take all the time that they need in order to publish your article. So and again, so these are all things that you need to consider. So you are adding something to the literature. You are aware of the areas of weakness in the current literature, so you are trying to address them, and so on. So the writing stage, of course, needs to start with an outline. Okay, so never start writing the article just like that, because you will get lost in the process, but also sometimes you waste a lot of time writing, sometimes just writing too much or too little, or writing a section or something, or paragraphs that you don't need at all in the article. So have an outline for your paper first, okay? This is what I need to have in this part of the article, and these are the ideas that I need to have there, and so on and so forth, okay? So have an outline, like the introduction is this, discussion findings, this is what I'm going to say here, this is what I'm going to say later on, and so on and so forth. And then, break down the writing process into steps, okay? So never look at it as one whole, so you just start with title, and then you write the abstract, and so on and so forth. It should not be that chronological, okay? Usually, a lot of people start writing the findings, okay? The findings first if you are a social, scientist, because you have done the research, you have the findings, so you write them down, and then you write the other parts, later on. And again, you need, for a researcher, finding the right time to write, okay? It's very, very important. A lot of people write early in the morning. A lot of people prefer to write after midnight, okay? Burning the midnight oil. It depends. So choose your most productive, okay? Your time of the day, to write, and make sure that you devote enough time to that process, okay? So 20 minutes of writing a day is not enough, okay? So you need to, to block out enough time for this, this process. And of course, you need a due date. So for each step, so you can't afford to spend like 1 month writing the introduction and then be left only with like 2 days okay, or plan to spend only 2 days writing the findings, okay? So you need to make sure that you have a reasonable amount of time or reasonable due dates for each, step. And of course, start with whatever part you find easiest. So once you have an outline, if you think that you are going to write, that the introduction is just there in your mind, you just need to get it out and write it down, why don't you do that, okay? So do it. So there is no reason why you should write, again, as I said, the introduction, like the findings first and then the discussion or the results and so on. So start with whichever part you find easiest. So this is in general skeleton of a journal article. So you need, every journal article has an introduction, and then when you are a social scientist, you need a part that explains the methods that you use to carry out the research, okay? And to arrive at, answering your research questions. Then the results, what did you find? And then finally the discussion, so you discuss those results. And then of course there is, a conclusion and the references and so on after that. And this is more detailed. So every article starts with this, so you need a title. Then list of the authors, sometimes there is only one author and it is you. But usually, increasingly in social sciences, you have more than one person, writing the article. So who do we list first, and then, so which author should be, mentioned first, and which one should be mentioned second, third, fourth, and so on. There are criteria for that. Then abstract, so which is a summary of your paper, okay? So people, again, when they are looking for when they are trying to make a decision to read or not your article, they will read the abstract first. Then keywords, so journals will ask you to come up with at least 3, usually 5 keywords. Some journals ask for more, like up to 10. Then the introduction, literature review, the methods section, results, discussion, conclusion, references, acknowledgements, biographical sketch, and then usually there is an appendix in some, journals. If you have, like, for example, survey results and so on that you want, to share in there. So yeah, so we'll, I think, skip this one. So for title of the article, this is the first thing that everyone, that the reader of your article will look at, so title. So make sure that it is well written, okay, and that it contains keywords, okay, in your field, okay, or what your article is about. So make sure that you choose, the right words, and again, don't make it too long, so the fewest words possible that adequately indicate or, tell us the contents of the paper, and avoid such words or extra words which do nothing, they just occupy space, such as a study of, or reflections on, تأملات في, and so on. This is not kind of language that, academic journals are looking for, and there is this kind of economy of space, okay? You don't have a lot of space, so you need to write as few words as possible. And you need to be very specific. So again, choose words that exactly reflect what your article is about, and avoid abbreviations because not everybody is familiar with them. So again, don't use them in title. You can use them later on in the, in the paper. Examples of, of titles, they can be nominal. So that means without any verbs at all, okay? So for example, visual pleasure and narrative cinema, the famous article by Laura Mulvey. Or compound, they can be of 2 parts, Then it can be full sentence, they can be a question, okay? So the structure is not important as long as it does the job of telling us exactly what your article is about. Again, in terms of authorship, so sometimes you have just one author, one writer for the article, sometimes you have more, okay? So again, an author is someone who has made a substantial contribution to the article. So never add the name of your sister or brother simply because you are family members, okay? They need to have contributed to the article. It's immoral, it's unethical to just, add, names of people just to please them or in return for some material, gain or something like that. They should have contributed drafting the work or to doing the research and also to the revising, the article and so on and so forth. And also they need to approve of the final article, okay? So sometimes you write, I'm not familiar with cases of this happening, but they must be out there. Like you list the name of a famous researcher as a co-author, as somebody who contributed to the article, just in order to get your article published, okay? Well, you need to, of course, to get the approval, the consent, okay, of that person first, but also they need to have read the article and approved of its findings and all the ideas in there. Because in the end, all the authors are accountable, are responsible for all aspects, of the work. So in terms of like lists, so you have a list of authors, like after title. Sometimes you have 3, 4, 5, whatever. Social science now it's, I think, I don't know what the average is, 2, 3 authors. Natural sciences, it's a lot more. 3 authors. Yeah, 3 authors. In natural sciences, like physics and so on, sometimes it's a whole tribe. Okay, and like in the humanities, this is less common. So I think up to now, most articles in the humanities are published by one researcher, but this is changing. Okay, social science is making an impact on the humanities as well. So the order of the articles, of the authors should be a joint decision. So the decision should be taken collectively. And then when you are publishing with your supervisor, you should be the first author, the corresponding author, and then supervisor, comes second. So never put your supervisor first in order to please them or because you are under pressure or whatever. Okay, it's not, it's not ethical. And of course, you need to make sure that when you write your name for a journal article, that, you write it the same way for other journal articles in the future. Because people will be looking for you, using your name and so on. And there is nothing more frustrating than having like a typo in your name. So you write your name for journal article and there is a mistake. So make sure that when they're like, and this is one of the final stages of getting published. The journal will send you the proof, okay? Or the proofs, of your article. Make sure that you read it carefully and make sure that there are no typos, no mistakes, okay? In the language, but also, including in your name. So people, sometimes they correct mistakes in the article, but they overlook, their names, thinking that they can't, mistake my name, they know me, or things like that. So the abstract is the first part of the article. 10 minutes? 15? Okay. So the abstract is that like short paragraph, that is the first part of the article. It's usually between 150 and 250 words. It needs to be well written, and it's a kind of summary like of the whole article, okay? So it is the most widely read part of your article, and people will take a decision to read your article or not based on whether the abstract is good or not, okay? And good includes, of course, the writing skills, so it needs to be well written, but also like they will read the abstract and will get an idea what the article is about. So if I'm not interested in that, like in those findings or in this particular like article, I'm not going to read it. But I read the abstract. So a lot of people, they buy articles or they access them through their libraries and they read only the abstract. So make sure that it is well written, it gives a very good first impression, and first impressions count, and that it does briefly summarize, the paper. So the keywords is the part that follows the abstract, okay? So keywords, so just one word, sometimes a phrase also acts as a keyword, and the most journals, they ask for around 5, keywords, but there are some who ask for as few as 3 keywords, and there are journals that ask for as many as 10 keywords. And of course, they need to relate, and of course, most researchers, they select them from title or the abstract of their papers, because you need to have all the keywords of your paper in the title and then in the abstract, okay? Because that's how people will dig it up, when they are using research databases, like, or just research engines, scholarly search engines like Google Scholar, okay? So you need to make sure that the keywords are there, but also having them out there will help, people, find your article, in future. And journal publishers, they are interested in this, okay? So they want to make sure that every journal, has keywords, and hardly any journal, hardly any journal nowadays does without, these keywords. They are very important. So the introduction is the next part. It's different from the abstract. They are not the same. So the abstract, is just a summary of the whole article, briefly summarizes, the main points, but also gives us an idea about the outline of the article. Now the introduction is different because it tells us about so many things. The first one is it tells us about the background of the study. So it situates, okay? It places your article within the existing, scholarship and within your field, and also tells us about the research questions. So the Professor Bلحياح discussed them, before. So the questions that your research is trying to answer. So you need to, to put them in there. Then you tell us about why it is a very important, topic, that you are writing about, okay? So highlight the importance of this topic, to readers, and you highlight also, very important, don't ignore previous publications in the field in order to promote yourself, okay? Professor Brigitte is going to talk about a different kind of promotion, later on, but sometimes people, in order to promote their article, they just, overlook, okay, research that has already been published in, on the same topic, okay? This is very bad because peer reviewers will know, okay, before even it gets published, okay, the gatekeepers, the peer reviewers will know, but also it just, good research is built on the shoulders of giants, as Google Scholar, has it. So you are, you can't start from scratch. You are always just following on steps of others before you, in the same way that in the future other people will come and they will read your research and they will add something to it and so on and so forth, okay? So nobody is Adam, nobody is starting from, zero. We are all just, adding something to what already exists out there. So make sure also that you mention the approach, okay, or the method that you are going to adopt in the research. I'm going to talk about the methods, section, later on. And sometimes some journals, they want to also, especially in natural sciences, like medicine, for example, they want you to mention the main findings of your article in the last part of the introduction. So this is more or less the introduction in terms of structure. So you have first paragraph, then middle paragraphs, then a final paragraph. Literature review, I think you are familiar with this. So you just review previous literature, in the field. Sometimes it is part of the introduction. Sometimes it comes after. It depends again on the journal. And it shouldn't be a comprehensive, like you review all the publications in your field. You just review, the most important ones. And try to use primary sources. Like don't just, report or review a publication that, based on someone else's review. This is a very common mistake nowadays, okay, because if the first author gets it wrong, you are going to get it wrong as well. And it's not, it's not ethical. You need to always go to the source and read, get your knowledge, from there. So in terms of the methods, you need to, to tell us what methods you used. And of course, there are reasons for that. In the humanities, we don't do that a lot. Because again, but there are more and more journals, especially mainstream journals, asking for a method section nowadays. Because they need people, they need to know how you arrived at these conclusions, okay? What methods, what research methods did you use, okay? And of course, in social science, if people do the same research using the same methods, they should arrive at the same results or the same findings, okay? And unfortunately, in natural sciences, for example, 70% of the time, like when you use the same methodology, you analyze the same material, you don't arrive at the same conclusions. Okay? Maybe that's one reason why it took so long to get a vaccine against COVID-19, because a lot of the medical out research there can't be replicated, okay? So, but anyway, so you need to have, to indicate what methods you used, to get, to the findings. So I shall not go into details about this, I need to, because we're running out of time. So in terms of the results, so this comes after the methods. So this is the core of the paper. A lot of people will read the abstract of your paper, and then go and read the results, okay, in social science, okay? And then they will skip, the introduction, and the methods. Because after all, you use the methods in order to arrive at these results. So they will go, and read them. So, and again, in this section, you report on data, collection and recruitment. And Professor Bلحياح talked about this, so the variables, demographics, the research population, and so on and so forth. So I will skip, this part. But remember that this is the core. This is the most important part of the article, which doesn't mean that the other parts are not important. But this is the core. Okay. This is the meat that people are looking for when they read your article, okay? Because in the introduction, it's just it's a transition. You're telling us about what's going to come, later. So if you have tables and figures that you want to include, they should go in here. And so in terms of when you talk about the research that was conducted and so on, use the past tense. And then tables and figures, so I mean, I will have to skip that as well. So there are problems in finding sections in some articles. So sometimes data that is reported there is not accurate, okay? Because it's misreported, simply it was not right, from the beginning. And don't repeat data that you have already, covered, like in other sections of the paper. Don't misplace, talk about the methods, okay, in this part of the paper, because this is about findings. So make sure that everything goes, to its right place in the paper. So discussion part is very important. It's the second most important part, like after, findings. I'm not saying that one is more important than the other, but just in terms of what people are looking for. So this is where you discuss the findings. So you have already listed and talked about, gave us your findings, but you don't discuss them in the findings section. You discuss them in section that follows, which is called, the discussion. So here you try to draw, to make links, okay? And to discuss your conclusions, your findings, and also you need to talk about strengths of your study, like what makes it such a good study in terms of the methods and the extensive data that you gathered, like it's the first study of its kind that has included a large study population or something like that, but also the limitations, and every study has limitations. So it's like, for example, small sample size, incomplete data, people did not respond, enough to your survey, or not as many as you had wished, and things like that. But also tell us if limitations are likely to affect, the results, okay? The findings of your paper are not, and what are the implications, of that? Yes. Okay. Some almost, so references is the almost last part, of the paper. So you just mentioned the books and articles that you have mentioned in your, in your paper and that you have used, and make sure that you follow the journal's manual of style, okay? And usually it is very similar or identical to one of the manuals of style that are already out there. And there are, today there are, there's management software like citation management software such as EndNote, reference, or Zotero, which is free, okay? And you use that in order to, to format your references, but also to just, save, your references and sometimes also notes about them. Yeah, so I'd like to end with this, quote by Robert Dade. Preparation of a scientific paper has less to do with literary skill than with organization, okay? So when you write an article, make sure that it is well organized, and well organized also means that it is well written, well presented, okay, and good, okay, or publishable. So that's what I meant by publishable in title, of the presentation. So the next thing is, of course, a revision. So make sure that you revise your work, like from language to findings to data and so on, and you make sure that you also get the help of friends and colleagues and your supervisor to help revise, the article, because sometimes you spend a lot of time, months, writing the article, and then one silly mistake, okay, in the final version, and then it gets published, nobody notices, and then, this can become, a disaster. So good luck with publishing your first or second article in a peer-reviewed journal, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sir Jamal, for explaining, some of the strategies of that can be deployed in publishing one's article for the first time. So thank you so much. Okay, so my presentation is going to be very short, and I'm going to talk about how one can promote one's research throughout a couple of stages or a couple of steps. Once you write your article or your book chapter and you publish that, you think that the job is finished. That is a big mistake that people do. You rely on the publisher of that journal or that book to disseminate your research. Very often, since we are in Morocco, and you know the problems of publishing that exist in the third world, particularly in the Arab world, there is a crisis over there, and we cannot talk about disseminating research as in Western academia. And young researchers and researchers in general tend to make this mistake. They just publish the work, they get the job done, and that's it. Very often when you look at interesting names that we know here in Morocco, for instance, and you look you know, for their names on Google, you rarely come across their names. They have, their visibility is very minimal. And so, as young researchers, I think this is your chance to promote, you know, your own work. So the question is whether I do exist. People do not know who you are unless you, you know, you exist in some form on different websites that researchers use. Now, to what extent, as a researcher, you exist, basically? Now, before I go into what sort of outlets one can use in order to promote one's research, very often, you know, people do mistakes, you know, terrible mistakes. And I know this, my colleagues know this. Some people just publish, you know, the research with local journals, magazines, and even book publishers with very limited readership. And this is a serious problem because once you submit your own research to a local magazine or local journal that has a very limited readership, then you are bound not to be read by a large number of readers. Another mistake that people tend to do is they send their own research to some journals which are called predator journals. المجلات المفترسة, and they exist out there, or مجلات وهمية. And they exist in large numbers out there, and one should be aware of this issue. And I know professors and young researchers have done this mistake. The outcome of that is there is a visibility, yes, but there is no respect for the publication itself. Now this thing should be avoided by young researchers. Now, what are the things that one can do? Once you send your research or your article to a journal, don't stop there. There is a task on your shoulder to disseminate your own work. Very often, the publisher is going to send you a pre-print copy of your own work. Now, use that in order to promote yourself and your work. And there are a number of outlets out there. We can talk about Facebook, we can talk about Twitter, we can talk about, blogging, creating your own blogging, Mendeley, LinkedIn. All these are very important social media it works. But there are ones that are very pertinent to research, and I'm talking here about outlets that are free, that you need to register in, have your own account, and then you start at least uploading your own work. So one very simple one is Google Scholar. We tended to use it all the time to make sure that we exist out there. At the same time, if you want to know about what other people have published, you can check their names and their publications. You can also enlist a number of publications that you have already published in the past. And so this is a very important outlet. I'm going to promote the research of my colleague here, for instance. Let's say Jamal Bahmed. Okay, I don't know whether you can see the page. Sorry? Can you see? Yeah.
ودير حسنة صاحبي دير بروجكت انت تتسمى بروجكت ستين تمشي هنا تدير ديك ديوبليكيت ولا غير دير ديوبليكيت هنا ديوبليكيت او نو
It doesn't work.
لا كاين كديرها عاود من شي حاجة أخرى أنا ما عقل.
It's okay.
لا بروجكشن ستين مسكينة خاصك تلقاها أنا غير أنت غتهضر.
All right.
Display, no, display.
That's okay.
Display.
If it doesn't work, it is no. It's all right.
Okay.
It's all right. C'est Jamal.
So which you were looking for the page هذه كروم.
That's okay. Doesn't work.
لا لقيته.
صفر جمال.
لا غادي نرجع نوريك اش غادير.
That's okay.
أنا هذيك ندير غير هنا في الديسكتوب شي بلاصة أخرى.
Sorry about this.
ديسبلاي سينس I found. يا تدير هنا.
That's okay.
صافي. لا تدير هنا يا بلاتي. Duplicate. دابا أي حاجة عندك هنا غتبان لك هنا. صافي. Keep changes.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. So this is the profile of my colleague Jamal Bahmed. I'm very sure that he, some years ago, possibly he set this page in order to promote his own research. So he gets there, he got there his name, his affiliation, and then the list of publications that he has done. And then over the time, he will come across, a feedback, let's say, on how many people have read and cited his own work. Professor Hassan Blhiyah also exists. So you can see that number of citation is on the rise. 326 people have cited specific articles. The highest cited article is English as a Medium of Instruction, published in Language Policy, which is a very one of the top journals in the field of language policy. So this is one very basic means of promoting one's research. You basically need an institutional email, and you take it from there. second interesting, I don't know if this is going to work again. A second interesting outlet is ResearchGate. Now, I don't know how many of you belong or have a good working knowledge of English. But even if you don't, then it is very important that you use these platforms in order to, disseminate your work. Sometimes you can only have the title of your publication together with an abstract of your paper. And that will attract the attention of people who will search for a particular subject that you have already worked on. So let me just move to ResearchGate. So it is a very important network that you should use. The way to use it is very simple. You will find a way of uploading your work, even if you have already published that work with the local or international journals, then you can actually upload your paper so that you can make it accessible to a larger audience. Many of you will think, well, this might be relevant only to those who speak English or Latin or French or Spanish. You can actually do the same with Arabic. Don't just publish your work in, let's say, الآداب العربي, or, let's say it is a journal called الآداب العربي or a journal called الثقافة العربية, etc. And, it is already published, it is out there. Now, take your paper and put it on ResearchGate, and then put it on Google Scholar and academia, as we will talk, as we will see next. This could be done in the form of a workshop, but given the time, we will not go through the details of this. Maybe, inshallah, in the future, we can do certain workshops on how to register in these platforms. Another interesting one, and I think it is a very important one. So before we move to ORCID, a couple of, let's say, pieces of advice that one can use. Share your work with your network. You will create your own network, a scientific community that is very much interested in what you are doing. If you have certain project that you are working on with other people, with a specific team, then you can add that to your ResearchGate account. You can raise a question, you can ask questions. People across the board will communicate with you, will answer your question. Then you can actually, like in Facebook, etc., you can actually send your comments on other people's work. So this is a very important outlet. It is free and it is easy to use. A very important one, and possibly a more serious account that you need to create as soon as possible. Something that is well respected by the wider scientific community is an ORCID account. If you have this one, then publishers will take you seriously. You will have like a CV there, where you cite your education, your degrees, etc. You will also cite your publications. If you have attended seminars, I don't know, conferences, you've participated in different events, you can also include that. A very good number of respected publisher will always ask you for an ORCID account. And if you don't have it, then you know, that minimizes somehow the visibility of your forthcoming paper. And so most, I think, Hassan, you have an ORCID, Jamal have an ORCID, I do have one as well. So again, I hope this will show on the screen. No, see Jamal, please, please help. It's like an ORCID account is what shall I say? It's like your CIN, if you like, among the wider scientific community. The problem,
it's a question of the mouse, not
that is avoided here is very often there are names that are very similar. So you have Al-Amrani Muhammad, and you've got 20 Amrani Muhammad who are, you know, publishing their works. And so you get to differentiate yourself from other people. There are many Richard Davis, and so about whom are we talking here? So ORCID gives you a specific number that allows you to, you know, to distinguish yourself from others. Okay. I wanted to show you the website, but it, you know. All right, okay. Shall I use this one?
Yeah, just go to Chrome.
It doesn't. Anyway.
This is the one that is the touchpad.
I think I need another computer.
I can.
That's fine. I'm about to finish anyway. Okay. So this is my ORCID account. This is where I work. This is my number. And then my publications are mentioned here as well. And this is connected to Scopus. And I'm not sure whether you know about the importance of Scopus. So anything that you've published and it is indexed according to Scopus is also, you know, will be cited on your ORCID and vice versa. Articles, for instance, let's say I'm doing a bit of promotion for my own work here. So this is one of my articles that was published in the Journal of Post-Colonial Studies. And then they have asked me for my ORCID. And the moment I click on my ORCID number, even if I am here on this different website on Routledge or you know, publications, then I'm directly connected also to my ORCID account. And this is very important, as I said, so you get recognized by you know, the wider scientific community. Let me go straight away to academia. Academia is also like ResearchGate. It is very open. You can upload, you can download other people's research. So one's own research is accessible to a larger audience. And what you need to do is create an account as soon as possible. You could put your name, your articles there, and then communicate with you know, a large readership if you want to. You create also a network of people who will share with you their own research, questions, and interest. And so ResearchGate, academia are accessible. I don't understand why people who are working in Islamic studies field, in sociology, in psychology, whatever, in our faculty, for instance, some of whom haven't, used these outlets. I believe if one uses them on a daily basis, as if you're checking your Facebook account, then you will get to be known and you get to know others who are working in your own field. The outcome of all this is one gets to liaise with other people in the Middle East, in the Western world, in Africa, in Asia, and this is very important for research. You also make sure that you raise somehow the number of the people who will read your work. And the moment you do that, you get at least, some kind of recognition by your peers, some of whom will cite your work. And this is what we aim at. We want you to be read, we want you to be cited by others. And so the easiest and the cheapest one are academia, ResearchGate. There are also other important websites, but these are the dominant one now. ORCID is very important, Mendeley is very important. You can also use your social networks, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and all that in order to disseminate your work. You can't just rely on the publisher to do the job for you. The publisher is going to make some money out of your work, but he or she or they're not going to do a great job, as you might expect. So it is your responsibility as well to make sure that other people have or will read your work. And so one concluding remark is that you need to communicate. And one way to communicate with a larger audience is using those outlets that exist out there. And don't, again, one common mistake that some of us do is we receive emails. And I don't want, to go into my email, but you receive on a daily basis or on a weekly basis 1 or 2 emails from certain journals called international journals of whatever, okay? And they want you to be an editor, and they want you to publish your work, etc. And you're happy, this international journal is inviting me to participate, etc. in this particular publication. The fact is, these are not serious publications. And you may just, be a little bit impatient and send your work, and you will get possibly published, but the whole process will, lessen somehow the quality of yourself as a researcher. And people who will find your name in a very poor publishing outlet will undermine you. And this can be a terrible mistake. I know colleagues in Morocco, on the whole, have published with certain German publisher for certain reasons. But that should be avoided, because those are just, predator kind of publishing houses. So avoid them. Set the standards high. Try to publish with serious publishers, possibly indexed we didn't have the time to go into Scopus and other important steps in order to know who is, you know, a serious publisher, one of the top 10 or 20 publishers or journals that can publish your work. Professor Jamal Bahmed has talked somehow about this, but possibly we will talk about this in the question time. So thank you very much, and I wish you the very best. And now the time for questions. Please feel free to ask questions. Yes.
يمكن طرح السؤال بأية لغة. نتكلم جميع اللغات، العربية، الفرنسية، الأمازيغية، الإنجليزية.
Hello, thank you so much for such a great presentation, so helpful. I have a question for you, Dr. Bajit, regarding EBSCO host, Eric, anything like these search engines such as EBSCO host, Eric, if these journals that you said that we have to be careful about, are they would they be in, am I safe, like using Eric and all these great search engines? Would they figure out even in these engines that are usually like sponsored by libraries?
Okay.
So
if I understand you, are they indexed?
Indexed journals, right?
I don't think they are. This is the problem. I don't think they are indexed, as far as I know. But they exist out there in large numbers.
But my question is, how can I discriminate between those that are not credible, just like these journals that you listed, and those that are credible? Those are good.
Possibly my colleagues will help me with this question, but one very basic way to understand or to differentiate between different journals and the quality of the journal is by going to Web of Science and Scopus, and you can just type the name of the journal, and it will. You won't find the journal as an indexed one. And so there is a filter out there that basically eliminate all those kind of journals that are just fishing, for, people who aspire to publish, their work. So by going to Scopus and Elsevier's, Web of Science, yeah, both. You can actually type the name of the journal, and you will, I'll tell you an anecdote. The other day, I was sent an article by someone. I don't want to name the person or the institution where she works. And I thought, well, this is a professor who has published an article in a journal, international, blah, blah, blah. So I, was fascinated somehow by this experience. So I put the article, as it is published, as a PDF, turned in. And it becomes a fiasco somehow, because some of, or pieces of, this published article, is plagiarized. And so these are not serious publication because they don't even check whether this work is ethically acceptable or not. They just receive your money, $200, $300, $500, and full stop. And people are eager sometimes for various reasons, because they need two publication for their viva or before their viva. They need a couple of publications in order to get promoted, etc. And they pay for that. I think this is the shortcut. And one needs to be very careful about what ones do. Possibly my colleagues...
yeah, if I can add a few things. Okay, so normally EBSCOhost, it's a database, and it contains primarily magazine articles. Okay, so this is good for undergraduate students. But if you are graduate students, you don't want to use EBSCOhost because it's mostly articles from magazines. Okay, as a graduate student, you need journal articles. Okay, ERIC is a good database. It focuses on education information, but usually it includes outdated articles. It does not include recent articles. Okay, so the best way to start is to start with Google Scholar. If you go to Google Scholar, you type in your research, then it will pull out articles mostly, and it will even show you the ones that are the most cited. Okay. If you want to go further, as Professor Brigitte mentioned, okay, to ascertain the credibility of the journal, then you can use, for example, Web of Science, okay, to make sure that this journal is indexed. You wanted to add something, or?
No, just for, let's say, Google Scholar, the articles that come up, like we have to pay for them, right?
Okay, well,
like they only show the abstract.
Yes, there is a
okay,
there is a website where you can get it for free. Okay, it's called Sci-Hub. 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 S-C-I-H-U-B. Sci-Hub. You can get any article that you want for free. Okay, so you just find it in Google Scholar. You type in the article in Sci-Hub, and you will get the PDF for free.
Hassan, I need to warn you here.
I know,
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But it's there. It's
right. Okay. You can get the name later on.
Okay, sure. Just to add something about these bogus or predatory journals, is that an American researcher has compiled a list of all these predatory journals, and actually he keeps updating it. So if you go to Google and write and search for list of predatory journals, okay, most of which seem to be published in India or Nigeria or wherever, I mean, there is a list out there, so you can just go, and if the journal that sent you the invitation to publish with them features on the list, then hey, that's a sign to stop all communication with them.
Thank you very much, professors. The presentations have been very superb, and they looked rich. And I wish to use the opportunity to specifically thank Professor Jamal Bahmat. Last time it was Professor Kimbib's paper, and today it was his paper, and both the presentations are quite okay. Thank you very much. And I recommend that next time when there will be time for presentations like this, for Professor Jamal Bahmat, it should be like 3 hours so that it will look like a dedicated workshop. I'm sure he hasn't finished what he has prepared to feed us with. But anyway, thank you very much. I just want some light on paradigms for those of us that do research in Islamic studies, and in the process of our research we come across, or we rely on both literature from the West and the East. That means from the core Islamic literature, and then the Western scholars, then neo-colonialists, and neo-orientalists, and so on. Sometimes one finds it very difficult to maintain this principle of objectivity, because when you observe writings in Islamic studies from the devotional perspective, works written in Arabic, you find that the difference is like between heaven and earth when you look at Western writings. In Islamic studies, when you read Arabic books, you find verses, people maintain loyalty and faithfulness to verses, to hadith, and so on. But when you read Western works, you find that they subject them to extreme liberal interpretations. So sometimes we find it difficult to navigate within this process, especially when we that have some insight in the Islamic studies, in the core Islamic studies, want to publish in the Western works. So this is a very big problem that I want Professor to shed light on, and especially also on the issue of person value judgment. When we read Arabic works, they pass value judgments. They say this is okay based on the verse or based on the hadith, this is correct and this is not good, and so on. But when we submit works in secular journals, they say you as a writer, you maintain neutrality, you don't have to take side, and so on. So I want professors to shed light on this. Thank you very much.
Well, this is a very good question, but I'm sure my colleagues will help me, with answering at least parts of it. Well, it raises so many questions, of course. There is the question of Orientalism or misrepresentation of the Muslim goal that has been part of Western, scientific, knowledge production. So Edward Said talks about that in his Orientalism, but scientific research should be objective, or at least in principle. Of course, when you write a good article and you send it to a journal, of course, they will not judge you on which country you come from or what faith, whether you are religious or not at all, and so on. The idea is when you need to maintain the distance between your own subjectivity as a researcher, okay, and then your own research findings and the research that you conducted, for that article or that book that you want to publish, in this or that outlet. So the idea is, I think it's what matters is the quality. And I know, for example, we three of us here, we were partly educated in the West, okay? So the idea is that, people are, who work in Islamic studies departments or in Oriental, languages and so on, departments and schools. They are some of the best researchers out there, even in your field, I guess. So they are not there, because they are based in the West, that doesn't mean, of course, that they are biased, okay? They have some bias against the Muslim world and the researchers from the Muslim world. Of course, that's not what you meant, but I'm saying that the best journals out there in your field, and like in any field, will publish the research, the best research, of course. And when you write an article, you should be, like when you write, I don't know, about hadith, about the Quran and whatever and so on, you just need to follow the guidelines and characteristics of good, okay, of good scholarship, of good, knowledge, production. So I think if a journal judges you based on your faith or whether you follow the letter of the hadith or the surah, that's not a journal, okay? So journals, they are channels of scholarly communication, and it doesn't matter where you come from, what religion, what God you worship, and so on. So I think maybe my colleagues would.
If I may add, of course, in any field, there is a preference for certain methods or methodologies. So, for example, there are journals that will privilege qualitative research. Okay, so that's the belief that actually we're not interested in numbers, we're interested in the story and the narrative. So it means in this case, if they reject your paper, it's not primarily because they have a certain bias, but really you're not following their own orientation. Because sometimes there might even be an ideological orientation. Okay, it's most, for example, they believe in postmodernism. Okay, that actually the truth is relative, and they don't want to see those numbers. Okay, so I don't think this is generally a bias, but there is a preference. And if they reject your paper, it might not necessarily it's bad. It simply is not in sync with the focus of that journal. So you have to try another journal. Okay? Of course, the problem would be if it's rejected everywhere, it's a bad paper. Okay, I'm sorry, but if, I've published several papers. Some of them have been rejected in some journals, but eventually I managed to publish them. So you just have to find the right journal. They will never ask you about your religion, or where you come from. It just has to be a good paper. Good journals, there is always 2 or 3 reviewers, okay? And these are, they don't know you, because when you submit your paper, it's anonymous. So they don't know, again, about your ethnic group, your religious group. I mean, it's not really that important. Okay, so it's anonymous. And if you get, for example, two positive reviews, okay, and one is negative, okay, the editor has to make a decision, but usually it will be in your favor. So I think it's very important to read, number one, to go, for example, to the journal website or the journal. Okay, try to read the guidelines very carefully. Okay, most importantly, try to read a few articles. Okay, try to follow the style. Okay, what is the ideological orientation? Okay, what kind of methodology is preferred? Okay, but if you don't do that, of course, you're not really making the effort. Okay, to write something that would be suitable to the readership of that journal. Okay, for example, if you write about something really local about Morocco, they don't care just about Morocco. Okay, the journal is international. Okay, they want issues, okay, that have an international appeal. Okay, so you have to go from something really local and make it more international. Okay, thank you.
السلام عليكم. الطالب محمد البداع، طالب في سلك الدكتوراه هنا بجامعة محمد الخامس كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية، تكوين لسانيات وقضايا اللغة العربية. أريد طرح سؤال على الأستاذ نور الدين بجيت، خصوصا عندما انتهى بالفكرة المتعلقة بضرورة معرفة المجلات التي لها معايير في النشر. أقصد هنا يعني خصوصا في الظرفية الحالية صرنا نرى مجموعة من الندوات عبر مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي، لا سواء في يعني عبر الفيسبوك أو زوم، أو يعني نرى مجموعة من يعني الندوات. هذه الندوات يعني يمكن لأي كان أن يشارك في هذه الندوة وينشر دون تلك المعايير التي كانت قبلا. يعني الظرف الحالي للكورونا هو الذي ساهم يعني في أن أي كان ممكن أن يقوم بندوة ويستضيف مشاركين فيها. يعني وأنت أشرت إلى أن الباحث ممكن أن يضع سمعته البحثية إذا شارك في أو نشر مقالا في مقالة يعني لا ترقى إلى العلمية أو إلى درجات يعني علمية. كيف يأمن يعني الباحث يعني على نفسه ألا ينشر مقالا في مجلة من هذه المجلات؟ كيف يتجنب يعني المشاركة بمقال معين في مجلة من هذه المجلات؟ أو ما هي المعايير التي ممكن على الباحث أن يعرفها لكي لا ينشر مقالا في أي مجلة كيفما كانت؟
سنترجم قليلا ما قلناه في السابق. الإشكالية ديال الأغلبية، ماشي الأغلبية باش ما نكونش، بعض الباحثين هو الرغبة الملحة في النشر بطريقة مستمرة، وهنا يسقط هذاك الباحث في واحد الفخ ديال أنه باغي يحقق واحد الاستمرارية، ولكن بطريقة يعني غير مقنعة أكاديميا. فعلا هناك رقم تسلسلي لمجلة معينة إلى آخره، وعندها ربما قراء وربما إلى آخره، ولكن هل هي مجلة مصنفة أم لا؟ بالنسبة كذلك الويبينارز اللي اصبحنا كنشوفوهم في الفيسبوك، كل اجتمع 6-7 ديال الناس كيديروا ويبينار على اساس انه راه لقاء علمي. هذا يعني من الآفات ديال ربما كورونا وغير كورونا. يعني هذا شيء كان موجود، ماشي توجد في كورونا، كان موجود، غير هو كان كيدار في القهاوي وكان كيدار في الشواطئ وكيدار في شي حاجه. الان كاين واحد شنو نسميوها، واحد الفرصه ثمينه للظهور. الانسان الذي يحترمه، الاكاديمي الذي يحترم نفسه، لن يدخل في نقاش عبر وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي إذا كان ذاك اللقاء فقط غير باش نبان أنا في الصورة، أو لا باش نتناقش من أجل أن نحب النقاش وداك الشيء. إذا أنا شنو خصني ندير؟ أنا كباحث أتعامل مع باحثين مرموقين محترمين عندهم ما يقدموا للبحث، نجي لعندهم. إذا كان السي في ديال الشخص، أنا شخصيا هذا موقف شخصي وراه كيتسجل، إذا كان الجمع اللي غادي ندخل فيه لا يرقى للطموح ديالي، أنا ما خصنيش ندخل فيه. إذا كل واحد عنده ستاندردز، معايير، كل واحد كيحدد لراسو المعايير. فبالتالي إذا كنت أنت كباحث قبلت بنشر بحثك أو ورقة مثلا ألقيتها في لقاء ما وطورتها واشتغلت عليها واحد 3 شهور وقبلتي أنك تحطها في مجلة مفترسة وهمية إلى آخره، فهذا أنت قبلتي تخلص 400 و 500 دولار المجلة في الصين ولا في الهند غير باش تنشر لك، باش تسمى راني صافي قادر أنه الآن نناقش الدكتوراه. هنا حطيتي راسك في واحد المكانه. لذلك الواحد خصو يجتهد ويعلي شويه المستوى، لان احنا كلنا عندنا هم واحد اللي هو شنو؟ نعليو لهذا المستوى، لا ديال الطالب ولا ديالنا احنا كباحثين. وبالتالي المسؤوليه مسؤوليتك انت، فين غتحط راسك انت اللي كتوزن المستوى المعرفي ديالك، وبناء على هذه المساله كتشوف واش غادي تتلاقى مع ناس في ويبينار اللي هما حنا كنشوفوا دابا داك الشيء باستمرار، وكنشوفوا مستوى هزيل، وكنشوفوا عاود نماذج رائعه جدا وراقيه ومستوى عالي جدا. فانت كباحث دائما بحث على بطبيعه الحال الافضل والاجود والاحسن. هذا كتبقى المساله قيميه، وانت كتشوف القيمه ديال العطاء اللي ممكن تقدمه في ذاك اللقاء العلمي. كذلك بالنسبه لما هو ورقي اللي غادي تنشر، حتى هو كتشوف فين غادي لمن غادي نرسل. الاخوان اشاروا لواحد المساله، هو انه كنا كنساينوا عام وعامين باش كيجي لنا ياه ولا لا، وفي الغالب كيقول لك صحح. كاين اللي ما عندوش القدره ديال يسمع سير صحح، شنو كيدير؟ كيشد داك المقال كيقول لك انا 200، وهذه اعرف اشخاص يعني زملاء ولا اصدقاء ولا كيجي كيقول لك انا بزاف عليا، انا خصني دابا 15 يوم غادي نشروا لي، كيخلص 200 دولار وكيتنشروا العمل وكيحطوه في السي في ديالو ونبينا عليه السلام صافي، هو رابح. بالنسبه له راه رابح، ما كيهموش الجوده، ما كيهموش المستوى، ما كيهموش هذه الامور كلها ما كتهم. اذا شوف المعيار اللي كتحدو لراسك انت كباحث، هل هو فوق المعدل واصل لواحد المستوى، ولا واعتذر على استعمال الدارجه.
إذا ممكن أن أضيف فقط، يعني فعلا هذه آفة، لأن كل واحد الآن يعني يأخذ كاميرا، فيسبوك، ندوة، 3 أشخاص يعملوا ندوة، يعني هذا ضحك على الدقم. يعني أنت مثلا في اختصاصك اللسانيات ممكن تتصل مع المشرف، يعني راح يعطيك رائحة يعني المجلات المحكمة في الميدان، ممكن تعمل مثلا بحث في جوجل مثلا المجلات المحكمة في اللسانيات. يدين المجلة ربما هناك طريقتين للتعرف هل هذه المجلة يعني في المستوى أو لا. أولا المجلة يجب أن تكون مثلا في حضن محتضى من طرف جامعة، مثلا احنا في جامعة محمد الخامس عندنا المجلة خاصة باللغة العربية والدراسات العربية. عندنا مثلا مجله خاصه باللغات لونغ ليتيراتور اوكي، وعندنا مثلا مجله خاصه بالدراسات التاريخيه اوكي هيسبريس تمودا اوكي، او ان هذه المجله يجب ان تنشر من طرف دور نشر عربيه معروفه مثلا او دور نشر عالميه. اذا بالنسبه لي يعني الجواب سهل. بالنسبه لي هذه الندوات التي تكون مثلا يعني على الانترنت اغلبها لا ينشرون، هي فقط ندوات وكلام فاضي، لان النشر ياخذ وقت، يجب الكتابه، يجب التأني، يعني يجب ان تكتب مثلا النسخه الاولى، تعمل مراجعات، يعني كما قال تفضل الاستاذين الكريمين، يعني يكون هناك مراجعات كثيره وتاخذ على الاقل سنه. شكرا.
Hello, so I would like to thank, first of all of you for these amazing presentations. They were very informative and expanded my horizon in many ways. Now, my question is directed to Dr. Hassan Blehiyah. So you mentioned, and in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the different steps of the scientific method. And you said, or you mentioned, that the first step is to identify and recognize the problem in your community. Now, this is kind of a personal question, but if you could give us a brief idea of the problem in your community that you identified, and how did you turn it into the main subject of your thesis?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I am an applied linguist. Okay, so I applied linguistics, and the objective of my research is to identify language problems and to find solutions for them. Okay, so I came back to, or I joined Muhammad 5th University in 2013, and as an applied linguist, okay, what attracted my attention is the problems that students have in terms of acquiring Arabic, acquiring English, or learning English, mastering French. Okay, so the general area of research is called language policy and language planning. Okay, so as a researcher, I'm dealing with these problems. I'm trying to find solutions for students to learn, let's say, or to acquire Arabic. Okay, solutions for students to master English. Okay, so as a result of that, okay, several of my publications in recent years were about this. Okay, so we actually published a book together. We co-edited a book with two other colleagues, published by Springer. And the title of the book is English Language Teaching in Moroccan Higher Education. I had articles on English as a medium of instruction. I also had an article on Amazigh language and Amazigh language revitalization, okay, published in the journal, The Sociology of Language. Okay, so all of these publications really stemmed from my interest in what's happening with the linguistic situation in Morocco.
Any other question before we close this afternoon? Okay, well, let's call it a day then. Thank you for coming, for being attentive. Thank you for the questions. I wish you the very best in your journey of research, and I hope that I can be able to meet you soon, inshallah, and of course read your work. So thank you very much. I would like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Hassan Blehiyah and Dr. Jamal Bahmed. Thank you very much.